Welcome to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. Today's episode is all about the new AB5 law in California, and it is going to be a duo attorney chit chat that you all get to listen in on like flies on the wall. So Braden Drake from Braden Drake Law, he is a San Diego based attorney, and he is here to chat with me all about this new independent contractor law that went into effect on January 1st, 2020 in California. So Braden lives in San Diego with his husband and 3 dogs. He calls himself a self-proclaimed taxpert, cooking aficionado, Ironman triathlete, and collector of cookware. He plays tennis, basketball, and volleyball, and you can usually find him on Instagram talking about taxes and business law while he runs around San Diego, after which he exercises an unhealthy passion for baked goods and burritos. Braden is originally from Indiana and graduated from Indiana University with a major in Russian and political science and a minor in business. He is a California licensed attorney with a master's in tax law. And Braden, I'm just so excited that he is here as a guest on the Legal Paige podcast today. You guys, if you are any type of entrepreneur that is based out of California, this episode is gold for you. And it's going to be really interesting for many of you tuning in too, if you're outside of California, because I think this is the big law that is going to start the trickle-down effect for the differences between employees and independent contractors throughout the United States. So let's get to this episode, Legal Pagers. You're listening to the Legal Paige podcast, where we chat about life and business with a legal twist. I'm Paige, attorney and photographer helping online businesses and creatives tackle their business dreams without breaking out in hives. No more legal mumbo jumbo. This podcast features simple, bite-sized advice that'll have you legally legit in no time. Are you ready? Let's get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I am so excited because Braden Drake is here to talk about the new Assembly Bill number 5 that went into effect on January 1st of this year in California that deals with qualifying a worker's status as either an independent contractor or employee. Everyone, for all intensive purposes, this is called AB5 throughout the remainder of this episode. That's what we're going to refer to this as. Braden, hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm very excited. I don't get to do podcasts with other legal professionals very often.
Yeah, I don't either. And I think that this is going to be something that potentially the Legal Paige podcast does more often, is just like a little chit chat between 2 lawyers interpreting things. And of course, this is like new and everybody's up in arms about it in California. So I thought, why not have a California attorney come on the Legal Paige podcast and talk about this? So thanks for joining us.
No problem. I'm here for it.
So I know you. We have kind of been virtual friends. I think we're going to meet in person soon, which I'm so excited about. But I would love if you could introduce yourself to all of the Legal Pagers listening, tell them what you do and why you do it.
Sure. So I am a California licensed attorney. I live down in San Diego. I also have my master's degree in tax law, which is, of course, very exciting. So while I was studying and waiting for the bar results, I worked part-time at H&R Block in their tax division. So I kind of have this weird hybrid of a business that does business entity formation, some contracts, of course, for California clients, and then also some tax stuff. So it's a lot of overlap with CPA work, actually.
Awesome. And where are you based out of in California?
San Diego.
Awesome. Well, I'm also going to San Diego soon, and I'm very excited to go there. I've never been to San Diego. Is it sunny all the time?
It's not sunny all the time, but our nickname, or what we call ourselves, is America's finest city. So you can kind of tell how we really feel about San Diego.
So true. Well, I'm in Montana and it's currently snowing outside. So, that tells you a lot about the big old, big sky state that I live in. We have very, very much 4 seasons up here. Okay, so Braden, obviously this has been something, it started, 23 days ago, went into effect on January 1, 2020, AB5. I have just had so many questions about it in the Legal Paige Facebook community, through private DMs, through email, inquiries. And I know a little bit about it just from the research I've done, but I'm sure as a California attorney, you are getting bombarded with questions on this. And your name came up as someone, I think, just of course, with your expertise in the tax world. And then, of course, this has a lot to do with taxes and probably the generation of taxes for employment purposes down in California. And so can you just give us a little beginner discussion on what AB5 is and the context of probably why it was enacted?
Sure, no problem. So I always, we're both attorneys, so we have to give disclaimers when we talk about everything. So I'll let you do the legal disclaimer in the beginning. But my disclaimer is that I do not consider myself an employment attorney. It's not my area of expertise. So what that really means is I've had to brush up on AB5 to the best of my ability, really just to help my clients and my students and my members in the capacity that I'm serving, which is really just they're creatives working with second shooters, all that sort of thing. So I kind of give the rundown on maybe whether you should be looking at getting an employee, and then I boot people over to an employment attorney to do all that work. So caveat there. Beginning discussion on AB5, this originally stemmed from a court case called Dynamex. It's Dynamex. And this was a case that was heard by the California State Supreme Court in April of 2018. And in that case, I won't bore everyone with all the details, but they basically created a whole new rule specifically for one subset of employment law that would redetermine how someone would be classified as an employee or a contractor. So after that case came out, there was a lot of questions up in the air. People had to figure out, how to grapple with that. I did some talking on that case at the time. And then this new law codified it and also extended the ABC test from that court case into essentially all areas of employment law within the state of California.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense total sense to me, let's be honest. So to everyone else that's tuning in, oftentimes what happens, of course, is courts interpret either laws or they could potentially make new laws. But that would just be in the judicial section of our government. And so in order for it to be codified, what he's saying is codified means put into place as a statute or a regulation, a law for all intensive purposes, that would regulate people on determining whether it's an independent contractor or employee. That is what's happened. So more people are looking at it because Braden and I know what, the court case is obviously precedent and it could come up. But for many, just entrepreneurs, they would have had no idea really unless it was codified. So that's the context of why AB5 came into play. And I don't think it really matters, but do you know who supported the bill? Were they tied to the case?
Yeah, so it was what's the word for it? I'm kind of blanking, but the assemblywoman who brought the bill forward sponsored it. That's the word I was looking for.
Sponsored, yeah.
Yeah, so the assemblywoman who sponsored the bill, her name is Lorena Gonzalez, and she represents one of the districts here in San Diego. So she's been, if you've been following this in the news, that's likely who you've seen doing the interviews and things on it.
Right. Okay. Yep. And I've seen that just based upon some news articles that I've read as well. I've seen her. So just obviously, generally speaking as well, because we're going to get into probably some weeds here, and you guys just bear with us because I think this is going to be a really cool back and forth discussion with Braden and I on just two lawyers' takes on interpreting this law as online entrepreneurs. And a lot of you listening, I think the issue is primarily with photographers. So we're definitely going to go into the weeds on that. But Braden, just why are people so confused about it? And why does it affect the online business world?
Well, people are confused because frankly, it's just very confusing. This is not an uncomplicated issue. There's a lot of caveats, exceptions, and also is creating pretty drastic changes. So anytime, there's something that's entirely new, it's going to be confusing. But if we're really going to zoom in and pinpoint one of the key issues here. It's when they passed this new ABC test, they essentially said the burden now shifts to an employer or a hirer to prove that the person they're contracting with, so we'll call those people workers in order to not confuse, contractor versus employee. So contracting with a worker, it's your burden now to show that they are a contractor, not an employee. And in order to do that, you have to meet this 3-prong test called the ABC test.
Okay, so let's just dive in. What is this ABC test?
So part A says that the worker must be free from control. I'm going to just really simplify everything here. But in essence, part A is like our old test. So the Borello test, all the factors, they got to be able to control their own work, that sort of thing. Part B is where the big issue is for most creatives. And part B says the person must perform work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. So to really break that down, it's like Paige, technically under prong B, and of course there are exceptions, would not be able to contract me to be a contractor for her business because we're both attorneys. We both do legal work.
Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. So obviously where this becomes a problem is with second shooters because you are hiring a photographer to come do photography inside your business. Same thing for graphic designers, floral designers. So part B was the big issue. And then part C says the person must be customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. If we're going to put that in like everyday language, it essentially says if you're hiring a graphic designer, they should be a graphic designer in their day-to-day life and have a graphic design business.
Yeah.
So where people get into trouble is if you're hiring someone as a second shooter and they're not a photographer and you have to train them, that looks a lot more like an employee.
Gotcha. Okay, so B and C is honestly kind of where the issues lie. I can see now, and I'm glad that you brought this up, why C is, kind of an issue as well, where people are bringing, and we've heard this in the industry for quite a while, at least I have, I'm sure you have as well, Braden, but as a photographer myself, and I'm sure that you know that I've been doing that for the past 8 years, it's really interesting because a lot of times people are telling you, mentors are telling you, like, you can hire anyone to shoot with you. Like, you don't have to have an established photographer. And for a lot of people who are looking for associates or people who are going to be very specific second shooters and come to a lot of their weddings, I mean, ultimately what this law is trying to do is put them in the employee category, which makes sense. I get that. And I assumed that this independent contractor employee relationship was going to be a little bit more defined throughout the years because more and more people are going to independent work, remote work, you name it. So, okay. So of course, let's just walk through this again, you guys, so you can understand, from Braden's perspective, and of course, what the ABC test actually says. They need to decide their own direction of work, free from control, and have the ability. I always say, Braden, and you can chime in here if you think this, when I tell people how you're classifying independent contractors versus employees, just with all of my disclaimers and everything, always the ability to say no. That's a biggie for me. If they have to do it and they feel pulled to do it because you're going to let them go or you're never going to hire them again for a wedding or anything like that, they have to have their own business and free from your control. And when they have that, they have that feeling that they can't say no. To me, that obviously looks like an employee. So free from control. B would be they have to perform work outside of the usual course of what you do as a business owner, which is obviously the biggie here. And then C, I love that you brought this up, they have to primarily be doing that type of business that they're helping you with, whether it's photography, graphic design. Florist, I know, is a big one that people have talked about in California as well, because they hire other florists to help them out, or they just hire their friend or mom to help them out, and the difference between those two.
Right.
So I know that there are exemptions from the law that are specifically enumerated in the actual bill, which are doctors, dentists, psychologists, attorneys, private investigators, accountants, brokers, yada, yada. Obviously, photographer or graphic designer isn't specifically enumerated. Is that correct?
They actually do have graphic design enumerated, which is interesting. Yeah. They have graphic design, fine artist. They also have still photography and photojournalist. It's very weird, like the ones they mentioned. I also wanted to note when it comes to like parts B and C of this test, we could get into a lot of back and forth arguments. Like, for example, the outside the usual course of your business. I've heard some people arguing, well, if I shoot weddings, but I'm hiring another photographer just due to the editing's not in my usual course.
So, that's a good argument.
Lots of ways we could go down that. But I think you and I are just going to spend the rest of the time focusing on the specific business to business exception. Just want everyone to know that there are, I mean, especially as attorneys, there are about 55 different arguments we could come up with, again, like with each of these prongs.
Right. Because ultimately what you guys are what we would be trying to do if you were to ever get in a situation where you have, I'm guessing it would be the California Secretary of State knocking at your door, who enforces your guys' tax provisions there.
Yes.
Yeah. So, ultimately it's like, qualify them as independent contractors, and then you kind of wait for hopefully one day someone doesn't come knocking at your door at the IRS, California Secretary of State, and then you start arguing these prongs. So what we're going to do here, you guys, is we're going to shift, because as attorneys, it's a lot easier to argue, well, you are an exception to this ABC test. So then you just completely go outside of the bubble of the ABC test, and we're just in, but you are an exception to the rule. So you don't actually have to argue any of these because it doesn't matter anyway. You would never fall into these categories and have to argue that. So what Braden and I what Braden told me about, and I'm glad you brought up fine artist, Braden, because I was sitting poolside with another photographer at a conference that I was at. We were like obviously chilling by the pool, and I'm the Legal Paige and I can't help myself. And so we get into this like lengthy discussion on AB5, and I just like bring it up on my phone and I start reading it. And I hooked into that fine artist exception. And I was like, I feel like I could argue that all day long. Like, what you do is, if you're a fine art photographer, or of course, other photographers define their work as fine art. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. But what you're saying is subdivision E as an exception is what is kind of like holding, the biggest teeth here.
Right. Specifically for, I know my audience, I'm sure our audience has a ton of overlap. So for 90% of the listeners of this podcast episode, I would venture to guess subdivision E is where all the juicy stuff is going to be.
Okay. And this has to do with a business to business contracting relationship, correct?
Yes. So it essentially, it's here, I'll just read it. It says the holding in Dynamex does not apply to a bona fide business to business contracting relationship as defined below under the following conditions. So of course, there are a lot of conditions. We're going to talk about them.
All right. So Braden, you just take the lead on this, and then I'm going to chime in because you've been really dissecting this as it's becoming, of course, more and more to the forefront of people's minds this year in 2020 as they're like getting ready to hire all these independent contractors.
Perfect. So what I'll do, and we can do this like popcorn style if you want.
Yeah.
But what I'll do is I'll start reading, and then we'll kind of just pause after each provision and then break it down and explain it in English.
Yeah, that sounds good. Be ready, everybody.
So, okay,
buckle up.
Perfect. So it says, if a business entity formed as a sole proprietorship, partnership, limited liability company, LLP, or corporation contracts to provide services to another such business, that's called the contracting business, the determination of employee or contractor status of the service provider shall be governed by Varela, which is the old test. So these are the old rules. One thing I like to really note here is that it says formed as a sole prop, partnership, LLC, and then keeps going. And in a lot of the Facebook groups I'm seeing, people are saying that you have to form LLCs to get around this. As attorneys, we would probably both, I know I would encourage everyone to form an LLC for legal reasons.
Yes, I tell all of my people that's like the best formation you can have. It's like you get your cake and you can eat it too.
Same. But it does specifically say here that the business entity can be formed as a sole proprietorship. And I think where a lot of people are getting confused is we all know, or most of us know, that a sole proprietorship is your default entity.
Correct.
But the way I always explain it is for tax purposes, you have a sole prop regardless of what you do, but you're still required to have a business license in most cities.
Yeah.
So if you don't have a business license, you're really just operating an unlicensed sole proprietorship.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I'm glad we're able to kind of popcorn style this. I think what people are probably saying, and what you and I would, of course, suggest to people, I always like to use the word suggest and not advice, you guys, because we're just giving suggestions here in a general forum to general people. We're going to continually just hound you guys with our disclaimers. But once you become an LLC, that's an actual business entity that you've formed with the state. You've registered it with the state. So it's just an easier argument for you that you don't have to go down this sole prop rabbit hole of, have you registered in your, home county? Have you got a license to be an at-home business? Yada, yada. You are an LLC. So
right.
It's easier there. But I love that you're bringing it up that if you're still a sole prop, don't, especially in California, how much is it to register as an LLC?
Well, our filing fee is $70, but the annual fee is $800.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I was I think it's enormous. So that is not the case in Montana, just so you know. It's $70 to file, and I think it's $30 for our annual fee. So people just create LLCs all the time. But I digress there. What I'm trying to say is it's hard for people. I get that. That's a barrier to entry to become a limited liability company. Honestly, if I was potentially giving a suggestion hypothetically to someone that just started, I would probably say a sole prop is your best option, and then just get a bunch of liability insurance for your business, which could potentially be under $800 for the year. And so if you're weighing the two, it might make more sense for that business. I don't, I'm just speaking hypothetically on some type of business. But I love that here you're saying strike down what everyone's talking about in Facebook groups. Because while it's good to be an LLC, it still covers sole props. So
right.
That's interesting.
The main thing is, and we'll get to this in the prongs, is that you just have to be a properly registered sole prop. So
exactly. So make sure you do that, which to everyone listening, I'm guessing 50% of them are not.
Yes.
I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay, continue.
It's true though. You're right. Okay. So now we're going to get into it said you have to meet the following criteria to meet this business to business exception. Mm-hmm. So the first criteria, which is part A, says the service provider is free from the control and direction of the contracting business entity. This is basically, just our control test. So we could spend an hour, an entire hour podcast, probably talking about what free from control and direction means. But generally speaking, they need to be able to do their work when they want to, all those sorts of things.
Yeah. And lots of people, what Braden is saying, you guys, and if you have further questions on this, I could even do a follow-up podcast episode on the free from control and direction. Lots of second shooters in particular and photographers that are hiring second shooters have an issue with this because you are essentially telling them what to do on a wedding day unless you just kind of give them free reign. It's this balancing act that could be, like Braden said, argued in court all day long. And we're not going to go into that, but what would you suggest, Braden, for free from control and direction? I told you my take on it, and I think it's really important that they have the ability to say no. They if they have another wedding that they book, that's their primary business, so they can say no.
Right. Yeah. So one thing I always like to bring up is if you have an event specific business, so if it's a wedding photographer or wedding planner where you're getting clients around a specific event date, it's fine when you're reaching out to contractors, in my opinion, to say the wedding is on May 5th. So you have to perform the services on May 5th.
Mm-hmm.
That's a take it or leave it. That's fine. But when it comes to all the other details, tell them that they can't wear crop tops, but you can't tell them exactly what they should be wearing or exactly when they have to do the editing if they are doing editing for you, all these kind of details. You need to give them some level of control beyond that.
Yep. I love that.
And also, like, I have nothing against crop tops. So, like, if that's the wedding vibe, you go for it. But you understand the hypothetical I'm going for here.
I love it. Yeah. And I always tell people, like, you can give them, an idea of where you're going to be on the wedding day and then what their roles and responsibilities are. But if you're like specifically listing out like 100 different shots they have to get, that's pretty direction specific. So I would refrain from that.
Exactly.
Okay. So B.
So B says the service provider is providing services directly to the contracting business rather than to the customers of the contracting business. So this one's really interesting. So let's say I am hiring Paige as my second shooter. You guys, I'm not a photographer. I don't know how to work a camera, but this is an imaginary fictional land we're talking about. So I'm hiring Paige to be my second shooter. It means that you are providing services to me rather than to the customers. And this is kind of tricky because obviously the customers or the clients, the couple, you're taking photos of them, but you need to have a contract with me. I need to be paying you. You should be delivering the photos to me, all of those sorts of things. So you shouldn't have a one-on-one relationship with the hiring party's client.
Yeah, I think that's how I would take that as well. So yeah, you don't want to just like associate. Actually, there's an issue that came up recently for me. I had someone reach out to me and say, I want to shoot at this venue. This isn't in California, but just say this happened in California. I want to shoot at this venue. You are one of the like 10 photographers that they like have on their books, and say it's exclusive. So only those 10 photographers could work at that venue, but you have a relationship with the client that wants you to work her wedding, but you need to shoot as an associate under someone or an assistant under someone. That wouldn't work because you have like the relationship with the client. So you solely need to honestly just be contracted by the business, serving the business. And of course, I think here, Braden, paid by the photography business. If you're paid by the client, like, just throw B out the window, I think.
Yeah, so when the ABC test first came out, I thought one good workaround would be if you just had your second shooter sign a contract directly with the client, because then they're not your contractor, they're just another service provider to the couple. I've never been more fearful for my own safety than when I brought up that suggestion in a room full of wedding photographers. They did not like it.
Yeah, no. So I would definitely not suggest that. And I think B is this specific enumerated exception is saying the contrary. So
right, exactly.
Yeah. So, but that makes sense. And yeah, you would probably be attacked by a room full of photographers if they said that, because that's their client and not the second shooters.
Exactly.
And I feel that way too, you guys. I get it. Okay. So C.
Okay, so C, thankfully, is much more straightforward than pretty much all the other ones. It says that the contract with the business service provider must be in writing. Plain English, you have to have an independent contractor agreement, second shooter agreement. It's got to be in writing.
Yeah, I have nothing else to say there. You guys, get a freaking contract. I don't know how many times I have to tell you all. Get a second shooter agreement. It is so important because I cannot begin to tell you how many issues have come to my attention that have to deal with a second shooter issue falling through. So just get a contract in place. Be very, very clear and conspicuous with like what their roles are, how they deliver images, if they can use images in the future. Put all of that in a contract.
Yes.
All right, D.
Agree. Okay, D. The work is performed in a jurisdiction that requires the business service provider to have a business license or business tax registration. The business service provider must have that required license or registration. So essentially, you have to meet whatever the licensing requirements are in the locality where you work. So this circles back to the sole prop thing we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
In the city of San Diego, you have to have a business. They call it a business tax certificate, not a business license. They're effectively the same thing, but that's your primary requirement for running a business within the city limits.
Yeah, so I totally agree here. I think what this means is like make sure you have your federal EIN as a sole prop, and then make sure you have all of your county registrations that are required with wherever you're at. And this would be, I think, on onus to the company who's hiring. Because of course, you guys, what you're trying to do is get enumerated under this exception and check all these boxes. I mean, how many are there? A through L?
There's a lot. There's like 10 or 11.
A through L. Crazy.
Yeah. So what I've been recommending, my suggestion is that now whenever you bring on a contractor or a second shooter and part of your onboarding process, if you have workflows set up in Dipsado, Honeybook, whatever, as part of your process, get the contract signed. Obviously, that's the main thing. Ask for a copy of their business licenses, and then also go ahead and get their W-9 on the front end. And then you can put it all in a file and you're kind of good to go.
Yeah, I totally agree. I love that. That makes so much sense. I was going to say, just like get a copy of their registration. So Braden, before we go any further, do you have like a checklist of these like A through L?
I do. If they, I actually need to check my freebie and make sure that it's like got all this stuff in there, but it does have most of it, and you can download it at www.bradendrake.com/framework.
Okay, perfect. And you guys, we're going to put that in the show notes, so don't you worry. And I'm going to make sure that I link all these things. But if I just feel like we're already on D, and if I was listening in, I'd be like, give me a freaking checklist. Because we always try to make this simple for people because we're the attorneys and we're like, oh, this is so fun. Okay, so D, make sure that you're registered correctly as a sole proprietor or an LLC. Even if you guys are an LLC, you need to remember like that it doesn't stop there. Like whatever your county regulations are for being an at-home business or, just being a business in that city, whether you have a brick and mortar or not, you have to get the appropriate permits and licenses.
Exactly. And also if anyone downloads that framework in the email that delivers the freebie, you'll also get a link to the webinar I did on this topic with a group of floral designers here in San Diego. Oh,
that's perfect. Awesome. That even more information, you all. Braden is wonderful. All right. So now we're on E.
Okay. So the business service provider maintains a business location that is separate from the business or work location of the contracting business. This one is very interesting because when I did that webinar, by having a back and forth dialogue with these business owners, I actually parsed out some language in here that I initially didn't get. So it doesn't say that your primary work location hold on, let me break this down. It says that the provider must maintain a business location that is separate. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't really specify like what exactly that means. It just says that you have a separate business location. So we could infer a lot there. But basically, you need to have like your own home office on all of your business registration documents. Mm-hmm. With the floral designers specifically, they were like, well, my contractors always come over to like my workshop or my home or whatever to help me prepare for the install. Mm-hmm. And so my interpretation of this is like, that's fine as long as they still have their own separate business location.
Yeah, I would say that that's my interpretation of it as well. Again, what happens, you guys, is these get these very like general framework subsections get torn apart by attorneys, and there's going to be lawsuits. And what happened here was that's very convoluted, and the interpretation of that could go many ways. So I think they made a mistake here, and they should have put maintains whatever you said, the specific business location. Again, it's like, that's not clear. I think maintains a business location is general. So it needed to probably say there maintains a primary location of business, where they're domiciled or something along those lines.
Yeah, my guess would be what they really meant to put here is that the hirer and the worker have like different primary work locations.
Yeah, that's how I read it as well. I'm like, if you are two at-home businesses and you have two different homes, then that's fine under E.
Right. But I mean, if I'm in front of a court, I'm going to say, we always argue you first look to the plain language of the law, and that's not actually what this says. We can infer that's maybe what they meant. That's not what it says, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. And again, you guys, the reason that we do plain language interpretation is because those florists were like, wait, this is how that you could interpret it this way. So from a layperson's perspective as well. But I think plain language for sure just means make sure you guys have two different businesses, probably two different, if you're hiring a florist that has another floral shop down the street, then this would be fine.
Yeah, the example I like to give is I had an office in WeWork, which is a co-working space, for 2 years. So if I'm going to hire like a law student to be my intern, and I'm going to require that they come to my office like 3 days a week for work, that's problematic. But if they're working from their home and they just like want to come in for lunch and maybe do some work a few hours like here and there, probably okay.
Yep, totally agree. Okay,
all right.
So F.
Okay, so F. The business service provider is customarily engaged in an independently established business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. This is essentially saying that whatever you're hiring them for, they need to have an established business specifically for that type of work. So if you're hiring a graphic designer to do graphic design work, they should be doing work as a graphic designer within their own established business.
Yeah, I think honestly, I think you had the nail on the head there. To me, this just means you can't hire Aunt Sally to help you set up a floral design at a wedding because that looks so much like an employee.
Exactly. So like I just hired my mom to be my first contractor/employee. She's going to be my virtual assistant. My mom has never been a virtual assistant, so she's not established in that business. Technically, under the reading this law, I should make her an employee. I'm probably going to anyway because, like it's mom. Mm-hmm. But yeah, she probably shouldn't be an independent contractor.
Yeah, I would totally agree. I think that's exactly what F is saying. So you guys just make sure you're hiring if you're hiring a second shooter, for all of you out there that have been asking me questions in the photography world and you're in California, just make sure that they actually have a photography business.
Yes. And this is where, and I don't know, we don't have to go too into the weeds here, but if you have someone who's new in business and really wants to learn how to become a photographer, that's where you should, it's going to be helpful to start looking into doing training. So it's going to be much legally safer for you to actually charge them to train them to be a photographer than you to hire them as a second shooter and train them to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah. Okay,
cool. So what are we on, G now?
I think we're on G. Yep.
I'm getting lost myself. All right. The business service provider actually contracts with other businesses to provide the same or similar services and maintains clientele without restrictions from the hiring entity. So again, back to the graphic designer, they need to provide the similar graphic design services you're hiring them for to other clients, mm-hmm. and they need to be able to do that without restrictions. Yep. Again, this is a little bit vague. Like it says maintains clientele. That's technically plural. Do they have to have more than one other client? I doubt they were meaning to get into these like specifics, but you get the picture.
Yep, exactly. So again, you guys, I love that you're going into graphic designers and florists, because then you guys know my take is always photographers here because that's primarily who I serve. But I think it's really interesting. I think to get into this G subsection, I think it's subsection, you really need to make sure that they are second shooting for other businesses as well. I think you're going to have an issue if they are only second shooting for you. Also, I think that really weighs heavily in employee and associate, side of things. So make sure that when you ask them, like, are you second shooting for other people this summer as well?
Right. And the restriction thing is important as well, because if you're hiring a second shooter to come shoot a wedding on April 25th, obviously it's fine to say like, you got to be here on the 25th, so don't double book yourself. Mm-hmm. But you can't say like, I really don't like Barb and, she's my nemesis in this community, so don't do any second shooting for Barb. Now you're putting restrictions on your contractor.
Yep, totally agree with that. Totally agree. Okay, cool. You guys, Braden has such good insight into this, and I'm excited. This popcorn back and forth is fun. I'm going to have more attorneys on with me. Okay, all right. H.
Okay, H. The business service provider advertises and holds itself out to the public as available to provide the same or similar services. So our graphic designer needs to hold him or herself out to the public as a graphic designer. It says advertises here. This is, again, one of those circumstances where we could see more cases in the future that defines what advertises is. My hunch would be this doesn't mean paid advertising. It just means that like you have a website, maybe you have a business card, any type of advert that puts yourself out there as a designer.
Yep, I totally agree. Make sure you guys, they have a website and an Instagram account that advertises their own photography services or graphic design services or florists.
Yeah, I would say if you have a website, like that's probably a slam dunk, but at a minimum, they should have like a business Instagram and maybe a business card,
Yep, I agree.
Okay. The business service provider provides its own tools, vehicles, and equipment to perform the services. This one's pretty straightforward. Second shooters need to have their own camera equipment. Like that's, they need to have their own camera equipment. They need to have their own laptop. Like you shouldn't be providing that.
Yep, I totally agree here. And I'm just going to interject. One of the biggest things that I see is memory card transfers, you guys. So I always suggest, and especially if you're in California now, make sure they provide their own memory cards. And then you are just transferring what went onto their memory cards onto a hard drive to get their images that the raw images they're delivering to you. That is always a contention, Braden. I didn't know if you knew that, but.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah. So obviously they have their own camera and they have their own lenses. You guys make sure you're not like letting them use one of your lenses at a shoot. I know lots of people try to shoot with like the same lens. Like if you're a Canon Mark IV and then you want someone with a Canon Mark IV and not with a Nikon because you're going to have different coloring. Like don't do that. You're probably getting out of this subsection I here.
Yeah. Love that. Okay. Jay, the business service provider can negotiate its own rates. This one is tricky for our typical clients, right? Mm-hmm. Because I know at least with my clients, because I draft their contracts, like their second shooter agreement says, $50 an hour, $75 an hour.
Yep.
They're likely not changing it for each second shooter. But this is one of those areas where my general suggestion is that you probably need to redo the way you're doing business with regard to this particular prong.
Yeah. Would you suggest that they ask, like, what is your normal hourly rate that you would like to get paid for a second shooter instead of telling the people what you're going to pay them?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's how I interpret that as well.
So you ask, it doesn't say that you have to ask and take the rate. It says that they can negotiate. So if you're just asking everyone and then you're demanding $50 an hour from everyone, that's probably not really negotiation and you're not giving them a lot of control. But if they say, hey, I've been a wedding photographer for 10 years and I don't really need to second shoot, so I won't do it for less than $125 an hour. And you're like, well, I don't normally pay more than 50, but you reach a happy middle at like 80, that's a negotiation.
Yep, I totally agree. So ultimately here, you guys, if you're hiring like 5 to 10 different second shooters, say you have 35 weddings this summer, you're in California, just make sure that you're negotiating. I think that's the word. And I agree here, Braden, like they need to kind of change the way that they're doing second shooter hiring is take their expertise and, their ability to use their equipment. Someone who has just one camera body and one lens is probably going to get paid less because they probably haven't been in business for a while as someone who has 3 camera bodies so that they have 2 backups and like an 8 lens kit. That person is probably more established and could probably and should potentially negotiate its higher rates. So I mean, for me, at the end of 2020, if I'm a photographer in California and I'm hiring a bunch of second shooters as independent contractors, I would like to see, and I would be comfortable submitting my taxes in 2021 to the state when I know that I have hired a few of the people at different rates.
Yes. Yeah. So if you're going to hire me to be your second shooter with my iPhone, you would probably not want to pay me more than California minimum wage. Although, as you now know, I would not meet all these other prongs because I don't work as a photographer. But you should definitely be paying Paige a lot more to be your second shooter because she's actually qualified and has experience. And that's generally how supply and demand works.
Yep. Love it. Okay. So no, that's so perfect. That's a really good one. I kind of like J. Okay. So now we're on K.
Okay, so K is actually our last one. L doesn't really apply, so we're gonna wrap it up with K.
Okay.
So consistent with the nature of work, that caveat's important. The business service provider can set its own hours and location of work. So we kind of covered this when we were talking about control. Again, if you're hiring someone to shoot at a wedding, they can't change the wedding venue. That's not reasonable. But if they have to do anything like post-production, that's not really, the correct term, but you get the picture. They should be able to do so relatively with their own discretion.
Yeah, I like that as well. I think this is obviously people are going to look at this one and have some heartburn because the business service provider can set its own hours and location of work. I get this all the time with independent contractor relationships for second shooters. Yes, May 5th is the wedding, but you are asking them to be there for 8 hours. Here are the 8 hours they need to be there. And the location of work is the venue of the client's wedding. So what Braden is saying is kind of the caveat around this is potentially post-production. If they do some editing, if they do some culling, that they can do that on their couch at 3 a.m. in the morning, in wherever they live and in their home office or, in their living room. Do you have any other insight, Braden, into like how people could argue the hours and location of work for like the hours they're supposed to be at a specific wedding venue?
Yeah, well, so generally speaking, I'm of the opinion that it's okay to give people deadlines, but you shouldn't be controlling like how they meet those deadlines. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, when I read K, it's like, it starts out by saying consistent with the nature of work. If your nature of work is event based, the hours and the location are going to be set.
Yeah, I totally agree there. So if we're going to use the, predicate to the sentence here, and you guys were such attorneys, like this is so funny. If we're saying the nature of the work is often like you agree and you have the ability to say no, and the hours and location, like the venue is easy to get to. I think a workaround here could also be, and I've told people this, Braden, I don't know what your take on this is make sure they're driving to the venue themselves. That gets into a ton of like liability and risk purposes on your behalf too. But I know lots of people like hop in the car at their home together and then go to the venue. And in California, I don't think that would fly. Like they need to meet you at the venue with their own vehicle. And you guys do that as well, because if something were to happen on the way there, like not good. And so again, they're meeting the criteria of whatever the event specific, job is.
Exactly. I'm like trying to think up of all sorts of hypotheticals in my head. I brainstormed a few, but I don't think any of them are going to bring clarity.
Yeah. So you guys, I think you're okay. Just make sure again that like K, anything outside of the like 6 or 8 hours you're hiring a second shooter for, or, the 5 hours of floral install for this other florist you're hiring on for the day. Make sure that they have the, ability to say no. They agree to that date, and it's all based upon the client's wedding day of timeline and not your timeline. That's how I would say is a good workaround here.
Agreed.
Okay. I think we went through all of them.
We did.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. You guys, that was a lot. You're like, I have a lot of boxes I got to check. And that's why I said in the middle of this, I was like, whoa, Braden, like, do you have a checklist for this? So he does. And we are going to make sure that you guys get this checklist. I would probably suggest that they download that as, either before they listen to the episode. I'm going to make sure that I put that in the intro as well so that people know. What would you say as we kind of round this out in 2020? It's kind of just like really do your due diligence. I always tell people this when I'm suggesting like, you guys, if you are trying to follow all of these steps, you are so ahead of the curve for other people and your colleagues that just have no idea what they're doing. If you can present all this evidence to, if the IRS comes knocking at your door, it wouldn't be the IRS necessarily, it'd be the California government. If you have done what you needed to do to the best of your ability to ensure that they really, really do look like independent contractors, I think you're 10 steps ahead of the game. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree. And another, something I would add to that is if you're in California and, you're running like an under 6-figure, maybe up to like a couple $100,000 business, and you work with second shooters here and there, do your best to meet all these prongs. Mm-hmm. If you're looking to build a multi-6-figure business and you're relying on 10 different associate photographers to shoot under your brand, this is when you really want to like put the money up to go get an employment attorney.
Yep. Totally agree. I think the people that are really concerned are the ones that are like, what does this mean? I've never had to change anything. Like, I don't have the people who are saying things, I don't have the money to be able to pay for half of the self-employment taxes that you have to do for employees. And with that being said, like, just do what you need to do to ensure that they're contractors, but everybody else needs to kind of belly up here and make sure that they're employees. If you guys are really, really, really concerned about it right now, as you've been listening to this episode, our biggest suggestion would be probably need to bring them on as an employee. If you are coming up with all kinds of scenarios for your second shooter on why they may not qualify under that prong, or maybe they don't qualify under 4 prongs, like probably.
Yeah, my other general tip is that a lot of this just comes down. Are we allowed to swear on your podcast?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, is like how well your contractors have their shit together. Yeah. So if you're working with someone that's a total mess, that's a red flag. You need to be working with other legitimate business owners who have all their registrations. And if you think that this person is only halfway there, this is totally self-serving, but you should send them to someone like Paige or myself so that we can help them get up to speed, because that's going to help both them and you.
Yeah. Perfect. I love that. Good job. And thanks. Self-serving on our part. Okay, you guys, that's a lot. Like I said, we're going to link everything. I'm going to make sure that you have total access to Braden. Hopefully, Braden, you don't get like massive bombardment of questions, but you might. Just giving you a forewarning there. Rapid fire questions I always like to ask people at the end so that we can stop talking about legal stuff, even though this is the Legal Paige podcast. Are you ready for me to rapid fire some questions your way so people can get to know you better?
Here for it.
Okay, what's your favorite drink?
Used to be soda, gave that up last year. It's been very painful, so now it's definitely coffee.
Coffee. Do you like it black or do you put cream in it?
I'm currently drinking, highly recommend this for everyone if you've never tried it, Starbucks iced coffee with peppermint and 2% milk. It's very refreshing.
Oh my God, that's very specific. Yes. I was asking because a lot of attorneys drink black coffee and I drink black coffee, and I've been told that I'm an attorney. They know, they can zone in that I am a lawyer because I drink black coffee. But anyway, I love your stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm more of like an iced, like a pumpkin cream cold brew kind of gal over here.
Love it. What's your favorite munchie food?
Recently, I've been eating a lot of chocolate covered cashews.
Ooh, yum. I think those are at Costco. I love them. What is your favorite movie?
I don't know if I have a favorite movie, but this is kind of on brand. During law school, I watched Legally Blonde like every Friday in order to motivate me to get my work done.
That's perfect. Yeah, of course, little Reese Witherspoon action at you.
Yes, what is my motto? My motto was, if Elle can do it, I can do it.
Yeah. Totally. I had this one time when someone said I should bend and snap like at the in the middle of my talk on stage. And I was like, okay, you guys calm down. Too far. What is your pet peeve?
Oh God, I have a lot of pet peeves, but I'll try not to like be too negative. And I'll say, I was talking with my friend. This isn't really rapid fire because I talk too much, but one of my new pet peeves is how we all like universally like someone's Instagram DM as our signal that's like, I've acknowledged your message, but I no longer want to have this conversation. You know what I'm talking? That was really crass, but basically it's like the sign off now. And then I always get mad when I have to like swipe open my Instagram because I have a notification and then it's like, just they like my message.
Oh, yes. The double tap. You get the heart. It's so annoying. I agree. And
right. But now it's basically baked into social etiquette. So like I do it too. I feel like I have to.
So true. I don't want to even tell you how many like double taps I've done on people's DMs before.
Right. Because it's like, if you just leave their last message unanswered without double tapping, then it's almost like it comes off as rude now, you know?
I agree. They're like, wait, you can't give me your time of day and say like, sounds good, thanks. Or emoji. What type of music do you often listen to?
So right now I can't say it. I can't address my speaker by name or it will start talking, but it's been Lizzo in my home office.
Oh, hell yes. What is the funniest thing that's happened to you recently?
I don't know. I was at a mastermind retreat last week in Palm Springs, and there was probably like lots of things. I always joke that typically I have a lot of entrepreneur friends, a lot of female entrepreneur friends that are all older than me, and I'm the youngest brother. I have 2 older sisters. So they always tease me, and I say that I'm like their business little brother.
Yeah, the little brother things that happen that are funny all the time. I totally agree. All right. Well, Braden, thank you so much for giving your time here on the Legal Paige podcast. I am so excited that you were willing to jump on and share your expertise. And I know everyone's going to find all of this information incredibly valuable that you gave. Like I said, you guys, he has a few freebies and downloads for you regarding AB5 and how to handle it as creatives and wedding industry professionals and online entrepreneurs as the like. So Braden, where can people find you?
So my website is bradendrake.com. Braden spelled Braden. And then you can find me on Instagram at Braden Adam Drake, middle name Adam, like the biblical figure, and last name Drake, like the rapper.
I love it. Perfect. We'll make sure to link all of that, you guys, and all of these freebies. Again, thank you so much, Braden. And I hope you guys enjoyed listening in. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legal Paige podcast. See, I told you being legally legit isn't so scary. Be sure to visit thelegalpaige.com for all show notes. And it would be super awesome if you could head over to iTunes and leave a review. Last but not least, don't forget to join my free Facebook group for unlimited legal and biz Q&A. Chat soon, Legal Pagers.